Climate action stage for our last presentation of the day. I'm going to let Dave and Mary get on with this pretty quickly. So welcome everybody, Dave and Mary.
Hi there, good afternoon. I'm not Mary, I am Dave, and this is Mary, and we'll share a bit more about our stories in a minute. But for the next half an hour or so, we want to talk about what it means to hear biodiversity. Can we hear it, and does it matter at all? And we'll get into why that is. But I firstly just want to welcome you to the session. I hope we can get into a nice conversation after we've shared a bit of our backstories. But quite simply, before I ask Mary about her exciting work and to share a bit about why she's here, I just want to tell you a minute or two about the journey, literally, that's led me to being here at COP27. About 5 years ago, I went on a soul-searching trip to Corcovado rainforest in Costa Rica, which is the most biologically diverse place on land. And it changed my life. I realized, wow, this is what the world should be like, flourishing. And I came back, and I lived in a forest in the UK, off-grid for a year, and I connected with nature after 10 years of busy work. And then I started thinking about how do I come back to the world of work and back to the system. And that led me to last year to COP26, getting on a boat with 6 crew and sailing up the Irish Sea to Glasgow to go on an adventure to try and learn something from the ocean. And we partnered with Dr. Steve Simpson, who Mary can talk a little bit more about and has worked more closely with. And we started making recordings through very simple audio recorders. He introduced us to what it means to listen to the soundscape of the ocean. And it blew my mind because I had never listened to that world that lives under the water. And what I learned was, through the fact that we got written up in The Guardian and a couple of other news outlets, that these recordings we were taking with our cheap recorders, $100 pieces of kit, were actually making new science, telling us things about the snapping shrimp that we didn't know as they were moving more north through the warming waters. I thought, this is crazy. How can the ocean be 2/3 of the planet, half of our oxygen production, and yet we know so little that a bunch of crew who are novices at sailing and novices at recording can actually do something that might be useful. I ended up at COP26 in the Blue Zone talking with Google Arts and Culture, sharing the story, and we talked all this year, and that led to us having an installation which we'll talk more about called Calling in Our Corals here in the Blue Zone over there. And through the production of this installation, I've had the privilege of meeting Mary and working with her in the lead up to this, who really can tell us more about her work and what's led you to the ocean and listening to the ocean. And then we can talk a bit about the project and talk about why it's so important to be able to hear and record the ocean in order to understand it and then protect it. So, Mary, thanks for joining me for a conversation today.
No problem.
We've literally had to drag her from the Philippines, where your natural habitat, is your mic on?
Yeah, I think so.
Oh, lovely, lovely. From your natural habitat to come here. So thanks for making it not just to this session, but for coming all the way to COP27 to join us. But do you want to tell us for a minute a bit about your work, a bit about how you got into the ocean in the first place, and what led you to be a part of the project?
Okay, it's a long story, but I'll try and
We've got
keep
some
it short.
time.
Yeah. So basically, I didn't initially have a background in marine biology. So I started off with music. So I worked in music production. I taught music tech at a music college. But I've always been into the ocean, and I've always been into scuba diving. And then many years ago, I was in the Philippines doing some volunteer work at a conservation organization, and then realized that this is actually how I wanted to spend my life. So I left my job, moved to the Philippines, and basically retrained as a marine ecologist. And so I've been looking, one of my really big interests is the effects of fishing on the marine environment and coral reefs in particular. And so I've been working with marine protected areas, but it was always kind of a dream to mix my background in sound and music, but with the biology and marine biology that I've been into. And so through a number of coincidences that I won't go into, I actually got to meet Steve, and he was doing sound recordings, and it was just a great opportunity. And so during the pandemic, I was in the Philippines, and he sent me over some recorders. And so I started putting the sound recorders inside marine protected areas and outside, to basically to be able to hear the effects of fishing. So the soundscape is an amazing opportunity to hear the biodiversity in the ocean. So, I mean, I guess an analogy would be that one of the main reasons that you want to look at the health of the reef is you do visual surveys. So people look at the number of fish, the size of fish, the coral, and that gives us a snapshot. So, but there's more going on. There's a lot that you're not seeing. So if you think about it in the sense of, you've got the coral reef ecosystem, which is a complex system, and an analogy would be like a human being. So also a complex system, a lot of processes going on. And if you want to know the health of a human being, you can look at them and you can, assess certain things. But if you really want to know what's going on, you'll do tests like a blood test or a scan, and there's underlying things going on. And it's the same thing with the coral reef. It's like if you want to know things that you don't see when you're doing visual surveys and things that are going on at night, another complementary thing is listening to the sound of the reef. So it enables you to hear cryptic creatures that you wouldn't see necessarily, and also nocturnal creatures that you wouldn't see. So it's an opportunity to get a better idea of the health of the reef. And so that's kind of what I've been doing over the last year, is putting in sound recorders inside and outside marine protected areas to hear the difference. So can you hear the health of the reef, essentially?
And when I first got on the boat and started doing these recordings, what blew my mind? Sorry, I got this little fly that is just having me up. I don't know if you can see that. But if I go like this, I'm not just freaking out. It's just because this thing's trying to attack me. Oi, get off me. I've got something to do here. And what blew my mind was, on land we can see a long way and we can hear over decent distances, but underwater you might only be able to see 20, 30 meters, but you can hear things like snapping shrimp up to a number of miles away. It is the sense of preference under the water. And so when we were trying to think, how do we take this experience that we've been lucky enough to have, but not everybody can spend a month feeling seasick on a boat, sailing up to COP, how do we bring this to more people? We thought, let's try and bring it to technology. Let's give people an audio experience where they can actually participate in this wherever they are in the world. And Steve led us to Mary and Mary's new recordings that you've been doing in those marine protected areas. They hadn't yet been listened to. And there's how many hours of footage?
Like, there's hundreds of hours. So we're putting down the recorders, a few.
He's on to you now. I've sent him away.
So we're putting down these recorders down, so a few inside and outside the marine protected areas, but we're leaving them for 24 hours. So, I mean, at the moment I've got 6 different MPAs and matched fish areas. So you've got hundreds of hours of recording. So I just haven't got the time to listen to all of these. And that's kind of where the idea for what we're doing at the moment kind of sprung from, is that we need help, essentially, to be able to listen to the health of the reef, but we need a way of doing it that's quicker than me trying to listen to hundreds of hours of recordings, basically.
Exactly. So we thought, why not, teamwork makes the dream work. Let's get citizen science activated on this. Let's multiply. We want to increase the amount of audio recordings in the ocean so we can get to know it better, and by getting to know it better, be able to value it and protect it. Because it's even though there's a lot of marine protected areas around the planet, I think about 2% at the moment, most of them are kind of only by name and not really enforceable because we don't have the knowledge to be able to protect them on a daily basis from the fishing. So if you go to our installation, if you can go, and if not, it will be on the road hopefully after this conference, but you can go in and you can be led by Mary and Steve into a learning journey where you start to hear the different grunts and whoops from different fishes and hear the difference between that and boat noises, and then we let you run wild on Mary's new recordings and tap when you think you hear life. And through that, we're hoping to prove 2 things. 1, that citizens really can do science with very little training, and 2, that we can hear a difference between the marine protected areas and the non-marine protected areas. And healthy reefs are not quiet places, are they?
No, they're very noisy. I mean, you'd be surprised. Like, if you guys get a chance to snorkel in the reefs in Sharm, then just listen. Like, try and listen. There's so many sounds going on. And you're going to play some of them, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly. I'll show you what we got up to yesterday. But I think we're familiar. If you're anything like me, who spent the time in the woods or, on land, basically, I got used to the idea that in a woodland you hear birds tweeting, and all birds don't sound the same. You have little tweet, 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 tweet. You have cuckoo, cuckoo. They're totally different calls, and I'm familiar with that, and I know that's a healthy sound intuitively, but I had never heard under the water. And I will, just before we go on to this, just explain one experience that was quite emotional for me. At the end of our trip, we saw a pod of dolphins come chomping past us in the water. But somebody put the hydrophone down at the same time, the aquatic microphone down at the same time, and played what they could hear out of a speaker. And we could hear the dolphin conversation happening whilst we were seeing them jumping through the water. And it completely transformed my personal experience of my relationship with dolphins. It got me a lot closer to them because I could now see they were communicating, hear they were communicating. The visuals wasn't enough to get me closer to them. And that's kind of what we want to unleash into the world, is that ability for people to connect more deeply with the ocean, and then also to protect it by having lots more data available. But it only works if we do it together and with machines. But there's something exciting I want to show you. We've got one little video to share, which is yesterday. I've got the kind of COP brain fog. I think it was yesterday morning.
It was, yeah.
And we went down to the reef outside of our hotel, which is, well, you'll see it in a second. And we did our very first experiment of trying to get a live stream recording going so that we can start, instead of having to just go and put recorders out that are battery powered that you bring back in with SD cards and put them on your machine, we are looking to see if we can get live streams going so that we can get recordings whenever we want them, beamed back and analyzed automatically so that we can understand more about what's going on. Without further ado, let me show you this clip. Do you want to explain a bit about what's going on, Mary?
So we're just putting the hydrophone down, so we're doing a test to see if it was picking it up, getting the levels right. So that's the hydrophone.
That's my music I added. So these are healthy reefs, aren't they? This is what it's meant to look like.
Yeah, so I'm just basically just checking the levels, making sure that the signal's coming through. So we're just doing a test in land before we went into the water, because it's a bit hard, I want to in there.
It's a bit of a sexy slow-mo, sorry I didn't add that one in. So we're streaming off an iPhone connected to we're streaming off a smartphone connected to the sound card, connected to the hydrophone. And now we're trying to plonk it in the water.
Yeah. So I was just looking for a good spot.
Okay, so I've now overlaid some of the sounds from the recording. This is what it actually sounds like through the hydrophone under the water.
Some of the lower sounds of the fish and the high frequencies of the snapping shrimp. You can hear that kind of cooing sound is another fish. There's a lot of variety of different sounds.
Yeah, so that is just a little snapshot of what we were experiencing yesterday. Before we go on, I'm just interested to get a sense of the room. Is sort of thinking about biodiversity and listening to biodiversity, recording it, is this a new concept for anybody in the room, or is this something that feels familiar? Put your hand up if it's something that feels quite new and you're sort of trying to keep up with me. Okay. And put your hand up if it's something that, we've heard this all before, I'm fully signed up, I know this. Okay, so someone in here. Okay, good. Because that's my sense of it, is that this is a completely underfunded, under-supported area that we need to develop. The oceans are deeply underfunded and under-supported anyway, 2/3 of the planet, 50% of our oxygen production. Yet last year at COP, the reason we sailed there was because it wasn't even a theme for one day in the 14-day agenda. And this year, we're really pleased that we've managed to get our installation into the middle of that dialogue to get people to literally listen to the ocean and participate in science. But where are you going from here, Mary? What's next with your research?
Well, I mean, I only looked at, Philippines is an archipelago with like over 7,000 islands, and there's multiple MPAs, or marine protected areas. And so I want to do as many recordings as possible to get an idea of the differences inside and outside, how that affects fishing. But also another thing is that, so a lot of the sounds that we're hearing of the fish, we don't know which fish are making those sounds. Because unlike human beings who don't have vocal cords, they generally use internal structures to create the sounds. And so it's hard, you can't necessarily see a fish and know it's making that sound. So we want to develop more technology that enables to kind of hone in the direction of the sound to figure out which fish. One of the benefits of that is that particularly with vulnerable species, you may not see them, they may be quite shy and not around. If you know the sound of those species, then you can go into a marine protected area or a fished area and be able to tell if that species is there. So it's another way of kind of helping with conservation. It's also, I mean, for me, it's pretty interesting. I love listening to fish sounds, but that's one area. And also in terms of what we're talking about, so look, with the actual installation, and we have all these sounds, also developing machine learning. So one of the reasons of getting citizen science to listen to all the audio is that they're able to tell us which audio files have fish sounds in them, and then we can teach the computers to be able to listen to the fish sounds automatically, so we can go through all these hundreds of hours of recordings very quickly, and therefore get a really good idea of the health of the reef by using that.
Yeah, and the goals are to get to 30% marine protected areas by 2030 and 50% by 2050. If we've got any hope in doing that and doing it for real, not just by namesake, not just putting a label on an area and then continuing to devastate it in the way that we have, we need ways to validate what's going on there. We need ways to show the density and diversity of biology that's growing back there. Otherwise, we can't get people to invest in it. And so it doesn't have to just be listening to the ocean. There's probably lots of different data points, but I feel very strongly that this is a scalable, accessible, and transformative, personally, way to sort of get involved in the ocean. So without rambling further on, I'd love to, in a second, open it up for questions and a bit of dialogue. And to see what kind of things this is bringing up for you guys, things that need clarification. I know that we've gone through a lot of different things, introduced a lot of words in this conversation, because it's not really one that's being had anywhere else that I can see. So I'd love to hear any thoughts or questions from you guys.
Hi, I'm Yusuf. I work in venture capital, but separately, I'm very interested in the oceans because I grew up around the Red Sea in Egypt, so I spent a lot of time with the corals growing up. Also very interested in music, so this is fascinating for me, absolutely fascinating. But from a technology standpoint, I'm really curious about, you're talking about scaling it up. I'm curious about if this can have implications, for example, how we're getting satellites, for example, to be able to help track forests or track on-land ecosystems. Is there a parallel for this in the oceans? Is there, in the future, how do you see like this type of learning or seeing in the oceans being able to help us track biodiversity in the oceans in a different way? Is there a role that music is going to play, or is it more to connect, or is there actually going to be a use where, how would this scale? Can this scale? How will it scale?
Well, you can join our team if you want, because that's what we're exploring, is how to do that best. You know, one of the funny conversations, not funny at all, it's terrible, but one of the conversations we've been having this week is Mary basically saying to me, yeah, but they're going to get nicked. You know, you can put fancy devices in the water, but they're going to get nicked because you've found that you had to camouflage your recording devices, haven't you?
Yeah. So I mean, the Philippines is it's a fishing community, and like you leave something out that looks kind of interesting, people are going to pick it up, even if it's just out of curiosity. So I've had to like paint them to camouflage them and kind of put them in places, and I still got one stolen by a spearfisher, but you know, it happens. So there's the practicalities of working how to deal with that, and it's also new. Like there's only been 2 other papers that have looked at the sound, inside and outside marine protected areas, and there's been only one study that's looked at the sound of degraded reefs and recovered reefs. So it's all pretty new. So like we're just trying to find different ways to do it and the best ways to do it, really. So it's all kind of investigated and we're finding it. But the ideal is to be able to scale it up. Another benefit of them using sound is you can put it there for long periods of time. So you can see the seasonal differences, the yearly differences, which is not so easy when you're doing visual surveys because it's kind of only snapshots. So, I mean, yeah, if you've got any ideas, then like we'd love to hear them. So
it's super interesting. I'll just say like one last thing. I think in Egypt, like I'll talk about the coral reefs in Egypt, it's exactly the case of what you're talking about. There's so many marine protected areas, but they're not protected at all. And we have no idea what's happening, and people are getting away with doing things everyone knows they shouldn't be doing. So something like this would be so interesting to see how that could work.
That's really interesting to hear, Yusuf. Thank you.
Yeah, and just can I mention, we've actually been, do you know HEPCA? Yeah, so we've been talking to them about doing some sound recordings, and they've been putting some recordings to get some of the sounds in their areas as well. And so we hope to go there and also do some recordings inside that area. And also during the time here, hopefully go to Ras Mohammed and do some recordings in the marine protected area there. So yeah, we're just trying to reach out and get people involved. So hopefully you go and train them up, give them equipment so they can do some recordings there. The good thing, especially with the small audio moths that we've been using, is that they are low cost and they're easy for people to put down. But as we were saying, like the issue now is kind of getting the technology so that we can go through all the recordings, because that's the limitation. So that's why this project and developing machine learning is really important to kind of go in hand with what we're doing in terms in the field.
But also through our partner Claire Brooks at Google Arts and Culture, we're beginning to wiggle our way through the Googleplex, if you like, and that 20% time's a lovely thing in Google. If we can get people excited, you know, in different organizations, but who are smart and already have access to the kinds of learning algorithms that we need, then we can activate whole parts of infrastructure that already exist but have never been deployed in this way. And yet, I think it's probably, if you look pound for pound of how neglected it is versus how important it is to us keeping this whole story on track or getting it back on track, restitching our economy to our ecology, I don't think that there's any area on the planet, literally, that is better to spend our time and money and energy into, which is why we're here, of figuring it out in Sharm el-Sheikh. Thanks for that. I really appreciate that. Was there any other thoughts, questions from the crowd? We've got one at the front here. Props to that man for that tie, by the way. That is the best bow tie I think I might have ever seen, certainly this conference.
Hello. We are from Geostud, from Romania, and we are also making biodiversity monitoring, also aquatic and also terrestrial. And
what's the name of the organization?
Geostud. Geostud. And I want to ask you, I wasn't from the beginning, and I want to ask you, what's the purpose of this monitoring, to offer an instrument in order to evaluate the number of species and evolution of species, or only focus on the coral and the life that they...
Well, the purpose of the project we're doing right here is to put it on the agenda, listening to the ocean, putting it on the agenda, and getting people to touch and experience this story for the first time. So it's primarily an art experience to give people a chance to connect. And then, you know, you can hear through the conversation, we're overlapping and doing different things as this listening collective. I have thoughts about how we need to use the data in ways you're describing to take diversity and density to show that when we do leave the sea alone and we let it rewild, that it can be demonstrably seen or heard to be different, and then allow people to invest in that. Mary would be having a different story. You know, you've got other ambitions of research and work that you want to do. So I think what brings us together is that primary connection. But yeah, I have interest in exactly what you're talking about. So I look forward to talking with you afterwards for sure.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, the research can be used in different ways. So like my focus is more looking at the health of the reef. So a way of kind of, another way of ascertaining that. But Steve Simpson, Professor Steve Simpson that we've been working with, he also looks at it in a regenerative sense. So they've done experiments basically. So I don't know if you know, with juvenile fish, generally they're in the wild in the ocean. And then they have to find a place to settle. So they find a coral reef that they want to go to. And they use sound as one of those things. So they did an experiment where they had underwater speakers that were playing the sound of a healthy reef. And more juvenile fish and coral larvae went to that area because they heard the healthy reef. So they've been doing some projects, I'm not sure what's in Moorea maybe, where they're doing a lot of regenerating the coral reefs. And so it's a way of kind of bringing the corals and the fish to those areas that are being regenerated. So it has kind of future also implications in terms of helping conservation and regeneration, but it also enables to understand what's happening in the reef at the moment as well.
And that's one of the exciting things about this project, is that the archiving that citizens and individuals make on Mary's recordings, we will hopefully pull together in a mega mix that we can then deploy through speakers back into degraded sites to help with that process. But ultimately, nature's best speaker is a healthy reef. So we need to protect it to get back to health in order to call those fish home. Thanks for your question.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Have we got any more questions, thoughts, anything that you want clarifying that we've talked about? Oh, this is Oh, go on. So,
Thank you. I'm Marian Tudor from Danube Delta National Institute for Research and Development, also Romania, but we are not together. We are together, but we have different questions. As far as I understand, what you are doing is a pilot project. So pilot project can have good and bad results at the same time. This guy was smart asking about the scaling, because by that you will establish a pattern, and according to that, a coral reef is healthy, very healthy, less healthy, and so on. My concern and question was about the possibility, the chance to make it wider, not only for coral reefs, but for other ecosystems in the ocean, even for fresh water. A little bit like in chemistry, when you are establishing parameters, or like in other way, you can find out the health of the ecosystem, not only coral reefs.
yeah.
You are using it, okay, it's very good because they are very important for the ocean life.
That's great. I mean, I agree with you entirely. We can, once we start building momentum with these methodologies, we can start using them in lots of different environments. So be keen to talk about different spaces that you're interested in. I think what motivated me was a conversation I had about Kiribati, who have the largest marine protected area, and the British foreign minister or whatever, the person from the UK that's out there, was saying they're looking at deregulating their marine protected area because there's no money flowing for them, you know, and that really worries me. If some of the work we've already done is potentially going backwards, we have to find ways to make sure that it's actually cheaper for a country to have a regenerative relationship with nature than an extractive one. And if it's not cheaper and they can't feed their families, local people can't provide, then they're going to keep extracting in ways that are unsustainable. So in any environment that we can find that we can protect through this kind of methodology, I'm up for that conversation. And that's why we're here, to start pulling this together. So.
Congratulations. I mean, you found a niche in the research, so the future is yours. If you will have a happy end of this, you will be a pioneer in this field of research. Congratulations.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
I'm going to bring it back to art, if you're okay. First, I have two questions, but a question and a comment. Mary, what is your last name?
Shodipo.
And who are you originally? You're a scientist or you're an artist? How do you consider yourself?
Both.
You're
actually.
both?
Yeah. So I started off an artist. So I paint, I create music, I sing, and then I've become a scientist. So for me, this is an ideal situation where I'm mixing both of my passions, essentially.
No, that's wonderful. But the reason why I'm telling you that is that I founded a streaming platform which has only video art. So I work only with artists who are concerned by art, pure art. We don't do documentaries, nothing, it's really pure art. I'm here because we're showing all the artists that we did collect only on climate change. But the purpose of this, I wanted to ask you, is that what I discovered working with these artists now is that there is one point where artists and scientists meet is in the research. Mm-hmm. So that's number one, you know, because then it's like I like to say that artists and scientists, they breathe in information and they breathe out their work. So whatever it's data or it is art. And somehow you're doing both, what I understand.
Yeah, there's a crossover. Like, there's a lot of creativity in science.
Absolutely, no.
Like, and I enjoy it the most when there's a project or there's a question and I'm trying to answer it, and you have to be quite creative about the ways that you do it and the methodology. So it's even though it's obviously different, it's not like with creativity with art and music, it's a lot more internal and personal. There still is a lot of creativity in the science as well, and that's another reason why I really enjoy it. And as I said, mixing both is amazing for me. So
yeah, and I just want to share one little sweet story, because I did organize some panels between artists and scientists, and one scientist from Rwanda, a young guy from 25 years old. We were asking him at the end, what would be the most incredible breakthrough invention or discovery which you think would save the world? And I'm starting to ask that to everybody now. And he came up by saying, the day we can understand literally every word that a plant or an animal is telling us, we're safe, because we make one.
Brilliant.
And I think this is what you're contributing, and I wanted to thank you.
Oh, thank you. I'd love to speak to you about the stuff that you're doing, actually.
No.
That sounds really interesting.
Yeah. Thank you.
Can I just check how much time we have remaining?
It's up to you. We've got 5 minutes on the schedule.
Lovely, 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 lovely. One or two final thoughts or questions, and then maybe pass to Mary, see if she's got any final thoughts. Anybody else want to share something, contribute something, and then we'll start wrapping up? He's back again.
Just a final question. Have you made anything that's out there accessible that I could go online and look at, or people? Is there music that you've made out of this? Have you made something out of it, or is it only the installation that's there now? It's just
So from last year when we sailed to COP, with that project, we took all the sounds and we turned them into music that we then played at COP in the halls of power. So that's on Spotify, you can listen to that. But in the coming weeks, we're going to be having an online experiment on Experiments with Google that basically takes what is in the art installation and makes it accessible to everybody all around the world. So we'd love to share details and make sure that you get that link and tap away and get involved and share it with your friends.
Also, Professor Steve Simpson, who's not here, he's been working with artists, actually, and I think there was just an orchestra which was using some of the fish sounds, and also another artist called Cosmo that's been using some of the fish sounds in his kind of creative outlets. So there's stuff happening.
And actually, Steve is currently on Lizard Island with no internet reception, which is really helpful, but awesome place to be. And he's in the Great Barrier Reef, and he's coming straight from there on Saturday to come and join us for the second week of COP.
He's doing recordings in the Great Barrier Reef at the moment, actually.
Yeah, so I'm sure you can find some sessions with Steve and Mary next week as well. Any final thoughts, Mary? Anything you want to share that you haven't had a chance to say?
I don't think so.
Cool. Well, without further ado, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, having this conversation. And we'll be around afterwards. Come and talk with us. We want to carry this on and continue discussing where we go from here. Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you for
Enjoy the rest
listening.
of COP.
Thank you, guys. That was brilliant. Thank you so much. Can we have one more round of applause, please, for David and Mary?